Oh well, there's no point in dragging this on anymore. We're finally at it, reading and writing filling the blanks, the bane to many students' existence. It's definitely the most difficult question type in the reading section by a mile, especially when you don't have much for practice and many agencies choose to bypass it almost entirely. It deserves much better treatment, and that's why we are here today, to learn how it should be done and what techniques you have. Let's get the basics out of the way. You'll be getting 5 to 6 of these bad boys in the test, and usually each question will have 4 to 5 blanks. Considering the fact that each blank is worth 1 point, it's no wonder that this question type is worth a lot of points. So it's settled, you need to do them well for you to have a shot at getting a 79. As the name suggests, this question type affects both the reading and the writing sections, so again, more incentive for you to devote extra time on practice. Typically, you will be given 4 words to choose from for each blank, and very occasionally will have to choose among short phrases, but it's the same idea. In almost all situations, the options for the same blank will have the same part of speech, so the main tool used for reading filling the blanks will most definitely not work here, and we have to rely on something else that we'll get into later. A solid recommendation on how much time to spend on each question is, on average, about 3 minutes, and this is cutting deep into the time that could have been allocated to other questions, which goes to show that this question type is very significant. Do remember that this is the very first reading question type in the sequence, so spending too much time on it will leave you with very little to work with on the other questions. That's really it. You have blanks, you have options, and you pick one option for each blank. It's the most fundamental type of filling the blanks, which you should have come across many times in school. For PTE, reading and writing filling the blanks has a heavy emphasis on a few things. The first is common expressions. If you know that a certain option would complete a viable and frequently used expression, then it's very likely to be correct. It doesn't even have to be a strictly written expression. Sometimes verbal ones also come into play. So that's the very first thing we can use to make some quick and easy decisions. If you recognize a potential expression, then it's probably the best pick. The second focus is something that we pretty much ignored for reading filling the blanks, and that is the context. Different question types, so we're taking different approaches. For reading and writing filling the blanks, I strongly recommend that you at least go through the passage quickly to get a general idea, because many of the blanks will have to be decided using context and reading comprehension. It's like doing the hardest reading filling the blanks questions for which all words in the pool have the same parts of speech, so there's not much you can do to avoid reading stuff. That's also partly why you should allow more time on this question type, because the passages are usually longer, and actually understanding what the passage is talking about is even more crucial, so make it a habit. Lucky for you, I have a few more tips that can help you to get just a few more correct blanks that can make all the difference. Now that we have reached a mutual agreement that you have to read the passage, you better use it to your advantage. A common trick is for you to have a prediction of what meaning the blank needs to have. This is especially powerful if you run into a passage on a familiar topic. Say you reach the conclusion that you need a word that is somewhat synonymous to tall, then you just have to go through the options to find the one that means tall and eliminate every other word that doesn't. Just be sure to make a generalized guess so that you don't rule out the correct option by accident. The second would be on how to pick among several options that all work for a single blank. Say you have done some elimination and then you are left with 2 similar words for a blank. The rule of thumb here is to pick the more sophisticated and complex one. Even if the other one also fits the blank, in a written context, the choice of wording is almost always carefully thought through. So you need a word that can convey a more specific meaning or a more accurate description, and that's a mindset behind almost all formally written passages. We can utilize that mindset and drop the weaker words. Of course, this is assuming that you know what the words mean. It goes without saying that if you struggle to come this far, it usually means you need to find ways to increase your vocab. That's literally the only skill tested for this question type, to see if you understand the meanings of words and how they are to be used. Then you might have to distinguish among synonyms, which I consider to be the ultimate challenge you can face in this question type. It's difficult enough that you have to know all the words, but it's even harder to know how each is supposed to be used. On top of that, you have come to the peak of the problem, to show that you know how some seemingly identical words differ from each other. Granted, you probably don't have to do this for most of the blanks, but in my opinion, it's these blanks with choices among synonyms that truly separate the ones good at English and the ones splendid at English. Don't worry too much because I'll be showing examples on how this can be done so you can have a feel and eventually do it yourself. One last extension before we move on to the sample questions. We went through this in the reading fill in the blanks videos, but it's so important for reading and writing fill in the blanks that I must bring it up once again. It's to truly understand what suffixes mean, and for reading fill in the blanks, we usually find it enough to just figure out the part of speech and stop there. However, for reading and writing fill in the blanks, knowing that the suffix tion usually makes the word a noun would not suffice in many cases, because most, if not all, options for that blank will also be nouns. Then you will have to utilize the understanding that tion usually details a process or an action that is happening, an ongoing event. Knowing this for the most common suffixes can then simplify many of the blanks a great deal, and this will serve the purpose of helping you guys to truly understand what the word means, instead of just memorizing its translation in your native language, which oftentimes contains inaccuracies and/or incompleteness. It's definitely not easy to find two words from two different languages that exactly match each other's meaning, and yet this is how most vocabularists do, and that has proven to be very problematic and inefficient. Learn how to learn new English words using the English that you already know, and build upon that foundation to actually be good. Let's take a look at the first sample question of today, shall we? This is a bit shorter than what you guys can expect for most of the questions. Read through this passage first to get the hang of its topic before jumping to any rash decisions. There are multiple clue words in the text, but in the end, you should come to the conclusion that the passage is talking about genetics and how one's genes can lead to bad things, such as aggression and criminality, impulsivity, gambling, and so on. There are studies done on these topics, and research has shown that there is indeed a link between the two. With these out of the way, let's look at the blanks, starting with the first one. Since the whole passage is about genes and bad things, whatever you fit into the first blank, it has to play a role in antisocial behavior, aka bad things. Therefore, the first blank needs something synonymous to genes or genetics. The first two options are parenting and environment, which are actually constantly brought up in such a context, but they are more like the counterparts to genes. As we talk about nature versus nurture, by that argument, culture doesn't fit the blank either, so even if you don't know what heredity means, it has to be the correct pick. Heredity means passing on things from the previous generation to the next, and it doesn't have to be just for humans, nor does it have to be about genetic stuff. You can inherit money, title, or social status from your parents, which is most likely nothing related to genes. Another related word is inheritance, which is precisely the stuff that you inherit. A similar word is heritage, and oftentimes they are used interchangeably. If I were to point out one key difference, it would be that inheritance is usually something tangible, like money or property, while heritage commonly refers to intangible things, like a belief, tradition, or culture. Great words to have in your vocabulary, and now let's move on to the second blank. Remember when I asked you to read the passage and you may or may not have done so with great reluctance? Here's why you shouldn't follow my advice. If you have actually read the whole thing, you will notice that right after the second blank comes compared to non-relatives, ... In that case, would you be surprised if I tell you that the correct answer is precisely related? Sure, I can explain that identical is incorrect because even if the passage talks about twins, it's not representative of everyone related by blood. Diverse means how many different things exist within a collective group or environment, and such decision does not fit any individual human being. Or the fact that ideal means suiting one's idea, being a good fit, and idealize means considering or regarding something as better than reality, which has absolutely nothing to do with genetics. But I can simply tell you to save the trouble and just read the whole goddamn thing, please. Sometimes the clues are right there, just a few words down the line. The third blank, however, is an entirely different story. This is something that we have to utilize our general knowledge and experience with expressions to make a decision. You should be able to eliminate delivered, as the word means bringing something from one location to another, and occasionally in a less literal sense of having a good performance. It can also mean helping to give birth to babies, but that's like a very specific way to use it. And that's probably where the deduction comes to a stop. There's nothing much to be done on the rest of the options to definitively pick one out using word definitions or pure logic. Here would be my best try at explaining this. If you want to use manage in this context, I will probably say something like these behaviors are partly managed by genetics, which is nothing like the phrasing used in the question. It also just doesn't sound like a usual context for which you would use the word. If someone manages another, it's usually in a hierarchy or an administration. The option directed is incorrect as well because the word implies that something is giving instructions to others to do things. And while this seems to be roughly how genes work, it's not exactly pointing at something, and the soft wording in the passage, like plays a role, correlates, and genetic links, makes directed too explicit and forwarding as an option. Need I say more? The correct answer is influenced, which, to be honest, simply makes a lot more sense than any of the other options. I know this is not a really good way to explain things, but if you happen to have a hunch, then feel free to use it, at your own discretion of course. If your intuition is sharp enough, then you'll be just fine, so long as the feeling stems from being familiar with how the given words should be used. We have one blank left. 4 past parts, all beginning with the same prefix, which is a common setup for reading and writing fill in the blanks. Once again, we have no better choice but to go over their meanings and decide if one is significantly better than the others. Inferred should be incorrect because the word means to draw conclusions from evidence, but we haven't reached said conclusions yet. That part comes later in the sentence as in, and each of these has demonstrated significant genetic links. Therefore, we need a word about just doing stuff, and investigated seems to fit the description. Let's keep looking. Inspected doesn't seem to be the right pick because it means to check something for flaws and defects, which is not what we're doing here with scientific experiments. Lastly, integrated is also wrong because it means to combine a bunch of things together to form a unified, bigger thing. It also has a mathematical definition, but let's not make English even scarier than it already is. And that's it for the first question. Time to move on to the next one. This question is much easier than the last one on a few different levels. Firstly, it's about umami and MSG, which is like an Asian specialty. Secondly, it has a few blanks that are just straight giveaways. I'm just gonna say it. The first blank is experiments, and the third blank should definitely be tongue. The first blank at least has the value for me to talk about the common expression, conducting an experiment, but what does the third blank actually offer? Everyone should know these 4 body parts, and probably more importantly, which body part is used to taste stuff. If you messed this up, bruh, go back to kindergarten. Grown-ups talking here. Let's take a look at the second blank, which is more worthwhile to discuss. This is a rare occasion that you actually can use some grammar to eliminate the first option. You need an adjective for the blank, but spread is either a verb or a noun, so this one cannot be the right answer. Then you should see that exported isn't correct either because this passage says nothing about the global trade of MSG, so no economic activities for us. Then we're down to exclusive and popular, and it seems like popular is a better pick here. I don't think MSG is exclusive to anyone, which suggests that certain people can't get their hands on this godsend seasoning. Everyone should have access to it, and in my humble opinion on food, due to my experiences with eating in the past 20-odd years, a little MSG can do wonders with whatever disgusting poisonous charred yet raw at the same time concoction you usually make. Drop your pride and sprinkle a little MSG onto your dish, you will thank me later. Let's go through the last blank. After reading the text, we know that some research was done and came up with groundbreaking results. And then the quote talks about how the wisdom saw the flavor before that research changed people's mind. Right away, we can drop the words insignificant and erroneous. Insignificant means not important, so that doesn't fit the context, nor does erroneous, which means incorrect. You might have a different take on erroneous and consider it to be right. After all, this research did change how people regard the taste of umami, but it doesn't go well with the noun wisdom, which has an emphasis on judgment based on past experiences. Sure, their judgment was indeed incorrect, but it was more like an uncharted territory before this research, rather than something completely wrong, and also the fact that it usually doesn't go with wisdom. That leaves us with 2 options. You might be wondering, the blank requires an adjective, but the first option, predominate, has a suffix commonly used for verbs. You will be correct, and I have double-checked in dictionaries just to make sure that it isn't some weird exception. So can you just drop it and go with important? Well, important doesn't seem to be correct either, so what's the problem? The official answer is indeed predominate, but we just talked about how the part of speech doesn't match the blank. My guess would be that Pearson made another boo-boo, and they meant to have predominant, which would make a hell of a lot more sense. The word precisely means being dominant before, which perfectly suits the context for something to exist before the research only to be changed afterwards. Third question coming right up. Damn, this is a long one, especially the gibberish in the beginning that is nowhere close to the 4 blanks, and yet I had to type them out for the sake of completion. This passage is about climate change and global warming, so we can default to automatically assuming that greenhouse gases are bad and we need to fix the issue. This is exactly what the long piece of text is talking about. Something needs to be done, but there are some pre-existing difficulties, so there's this fancy new technology to help us for now. Well, it's not really that fancy. After all, this report was released back in 2007, but let's just pretend that things haven't gone far worse in the past 13 years. The first blank is a good example for us to practice the technique of forming an expectation. We already know that climate change is bad, but it's difficult to make any significant improvements. If you were to fit any word you like into the first blank, which word would you choose? If you ask me, big seems to go well with effort, and it fits our expectation that we need a huge effort to stop global warming. Therefore, you have simplified the task to just looking for a synonym of big and huge. Let's go over the words given as options. The first word, colossal, precisely means very big, so if you like, you can pretty much just stop here and move on. Of course, I would like to talk about a few more things. A colossus is a huge statue or a mythical creature that's basically a very big person. As to whether it has to be made of metals and talk with a Russian accent like the character does in Marvel movies, I don't know, and frankly, I don't really care. For the purpose of learning English, it's good enough to know that colossus is a synonym to giant. It's a word that sometimes shows up in fantasy fictions or video games, so the next time your parents yell at you for wasting time on these quote-unquote useless things, you can just yell back, "Stop being a colossal party pooper, I'm actually learning stuff here." Give it a try and let me know how it goes. Do I still have to talk about the other 3 options? Might as well. These are some good words to have in your vocab. The word nominal has quite a few common uses, but it can be roughly translated to as it says in text, which suggests that A, it might not be the real case, like how the presidential nominee isn't the real president. B, it represents an average or expectation that might differ every time, like the printed weight of food packages, for which some variance is allowed. Or C, that it's just downright less than reality, so it can sometimes be synonymous to small, unimportant, or just there for the record, like how some services charge a very minuscule fee just to annoy you. Then you have negligible, which means can be ignored because it's not big enough. Lastly, customary is precisely an adjective for the noun custom, which is a tradition or a widely accepted practice. The second blank is, in a way, quite difficult to explain. Like, there's no concrete way to justify why I just went straight ahead and picked infrastructure. I guess it's like an instinct because I'm quite familiar with this topic. Anyway, the best possible rationale would probably be the adjective energy intensive before the blank. Then you just have to say that agriculture, or simply farming and raising animals, doesn't really fit our discussion on burning fossil fuels and releasing gas into the atmosphere. By the same logic, architecture doesn't fit either, which is the design and building of, well, buildings. For most of you, the only challenging word among the 4 should be conjecture, which can either be a verb or a noun. Either way, it means forming an opinion or conclusion on something while having incomplete information. In a way, it's a fancy synonym to guessing, estimation, or deduction. Infrastructure is literally interpreted as the structure below, so it means the fundamental stuff like pipelines, electricity grid, roads, and so on, and it is the best pick here. The third blank is something that we can once again use the trick of prediction to answer easily. The previous sentence talks about how it takes a lot of effort to do research and stuff, so naturally doing something to the world's energy system is unlikely to happen soon. Therefore, we might be looking for something along the lines of changing or improving. Again, using general terms here so we don't get too cocky and unintentionally miss the correct option. Let's see, altering seems to fit the description quite well, so we can keep that in mind and convince ourselves of why the other 3 are garbage. Revoking means to nullify or to end something, especially when we talk about group decisions or actions in court. Long story short, it's incorrect. Comparing is a word that you should definitely know. Long story short, it's also incorrect. Analyzing is the present part of analyze, which is a word that we have run into multiple times already. Long story short, it's also, you ready for this? Incorrect. Seems like altering is our best bet here, and indeed it is correct. Let's use this trick one more time for the last blank. It's right in front of growth in emissions, which is something we don't want when talking about climate change. Therefore, we might need a word that means decreasing or lowering. However, after we go through the list, none of the words seem to fit the description. Not a big problem. In this case, we just have to find the word that defies our expectation the least, and it should be the correct answer. Sustaining means to keep something going, which we definitely don't want to have for the growth of emissions. Curbing means to restrain something, to keep something within a manageable range. At least curbing has a similar tone to lowering and decreasing, so we will keep it in the run for now. Dividing the growth in emissions just doesn't sound right at all. I don't know how that would even work, so being the smart cookie that I am, I'm just gonna assume that whatever I don't understand must be wrong. Then we have increasing, which is directly opposite to our expectation, so no way in hell will that be correct. We are left with curbing, so pick it and you'll get the point. There you go. 3 questions discussed at length to show my thought processes and demonstrate whatever little techniques still available to us. Bear in mind that it's much more about the individual words compared to reading fill in the blanks, so you might as well use this opportunity to expand your vocabulary. It's definitely more fun than solely memorizing stuff, and you have passages that serve as a context to show how these words can be used. It's a very simplistic question type, but it's nothing easy, and it truly puts your vocab skills to the test. Just like for reading fill in the blanks, there will be a few more walkthroughs coming soon so we can look at more questions. I hope this has been helpful to you guys, and please like, subscribe, and share so more can improve on this difficult question type. A few days back, Donald Trump just got owned during an interview on Fox News. Hilarious as it was, he blatantly lied about the US having the best mortality rate while holding a chart that doesn't even say that. Oh well, I'm locking myself indoors for at least a few more months just so that I don't die before that idiot does. I suggest you do the same, and I'll see you all next time.